make sure to give my dad a 5-star review.
Make sure to like and subscribe to his YouTube. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show.
Why do 81% of evangelicals who don't want same-sex marriage, don't like divorce, will all these things, who can see all the moral failings of Trump, why do they choose this man? And there's the exchange argument about judges and all this, but that doesn't explain the fervency. That doesn't explain the emotion and the passion, right? And so there's I think a willing suspension of belief to give oneself over and kind of get worked up, that is pleasurable, and that becomes a cycle of identity formation, and you become a fan, and you become invested in this person, you become invested in their success.
Hey, welcome Faithful Politics listeners and viewers. If you're watching on our YouTube channel, I am your political host, Will Wright, and I'm joined by Pastor Josh Bertram as your faithful host. How's it going, Josh?
Doing well. Thanks, Will.
And this week we have two gentlemen here from two different, I guess, not professions, two different academic worlds. We have Jerome Copulsky and Michael J. Altman. So just a little info about them. So Michael is the associate professor in the Department of Religious Studies at the University of Alabama. And Dr. Jerome Copulsky is the consulting scholar at the Smithsonian National Museum of America's History Center for the Understanding of Religion in American History and research fellow at the Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs. So welcome, gentlemen. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us. This is great.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so we brought you here to talk about some work that you have done on a project called Uncivil Religion. So maybe we can just kind of jump right into it, and you can tell our audience, like, what the heck is Uncivil Religion?
Well, what is it, Jerome? What is it, Jerome?
Well, the project is a web archive of born digital images and videos relating to the religious dimensions of January 6, 2021. And what we've done is we've collected photographs and videos that we were able to find on social media, mostly taken by people who were participating in the event, both in the rallies and the riot and insurrection, and providing a place for them to live on the internet so that the public and scholars can go and see that there was a religious aspect, religious aspects, we should say, to the events of January 6th at the Capitol. And we've also invited a number of scholars in religious studies to provide brief interpretive essays on selected images, to use the tools and the categories and the insights of religious studies to shed light on the event itself.
And did you want to add anything to that, Mike?
No, I mean, I think that, it's a both a kind of exhibit of the digital objects, a segment. I think there's 107 objects in the site right now, and that's taken out of what could have been thousands. And then the essays are sort of attempts at interpretation on sort of selected ones. So it's this nice balance between sort of galleries where people can see stuff for themselves, and then some work that kind of leads you through making sense of some of it as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, why, like, what would inspire you to take on, like, this, I don't know, what appeared to be like this Herculean effort to chronicle, the event? I mean, like, I think it's safe to say that there's been enough documentary so far around January 6th, and supposedly there's a movie that's being made by the Don't Look Up folks called J6 about the event. So like what inspired you guys to kind of add sort of this to the canon of events that happened on that day?
Hey, Will, are you playing the part of Trump in that movie?
I am. Yeah. Yeah. This is the this is
figured.
the version that will be aired on BET.
I can't wait to see that. So, I think first off, we were all shocked by the event. And one of the things that I noticed and Mike noticed and a number of people who were watching noticed was that many of the people who were there at the rallies and who participated in the assault at the Capitol were carrying religion with them. Right? There was some expression of religious identity, religious belief, religious practice going on, and that was very clear, and it jumped out at me as an observer. And shortly after the event, our colleague Peter Manseau, who is the religion curator at the Smithsonian Museum of American History, began on Twitter to tag a number of these photographs and videos and statements, which showed that people were motivated not only by their support for Trump and his attempt to stop the steal, but also integrated their religious beliefs and their religious identities with their activities. And we felt it was important to mark that and to catalog it, to illuminate it, and to try to understand what is the relationship between one's religious identity, religious commitments, and these very radical political activities that were going on that day.
Yeah, I was actually, as I usually am in early January, making a syllabus that should have been done in December. I was
Nice.
teaching that spring semester. I was going to be teaching my class on religion, politics, and law, and so this was happening, and I saw Peter's Twitter tweets, and I was just like, whoa, there's a lot here. And over the next couple of days, I was like, I should just redo this whole syllabus. So I took that event and restructured the whole syllabus around it so that different moments and images and a lot of the early takes on it that came out in that first couple of weeks became kind of like the beginnings of sort of units in the class. And so that got me thinking right away, like we need to talk about this. We need to talk about this in class. We need to have this kind of and hear what students are thinking. And so that happened in the spring, and then Peter and the chair of our department here at UA, Russell McCutcheon, had a conversation over Twitter where all good academic conversation occurred about the stuff he had found and had a hashtag and had written about a little bit, like what to do. Is there something more to be done here? We have a digital lab, the Art Religious Studies digital lab, that works on digital projects. And Russell was kind of like, we might have some help, if we might be interested in working on this. And so I got a call from Russell over the summer saying, what do you think about this? Are you interested? And so that's when I kind of got, and I just taught that class, and he knew that, and that's kind of when I got brought in. And then Jerome and I kind of met in August and started thinking about what's doable in a semester, basically, as a project. And so we kind of settled on let's just find, I'm a big fan of examples. Let's just find a telling example that we can kind of figure out how to explain for people rather than trying to be exhaustive. And so we originally thought maybe we'll do 10 or 12. And I think we have 17 or 18 essays on the site now. So we shockingly overperformed on that. And just had people who were willing to write and were interested in being part of the project. So that was, and then I was also teaching our religious studies and public humanities course that we have in our master's program here. And so those students are learning how to build projects like this and how to think about presenting academic work publicly, how to write for public audiences, how to do digital projects. So those 3 students in that course did a lot of the kind of work on sorting through the thousands of things, all the things that Peter had found, all the things we found other places online, sorting through them, sending them to Jerome and I to see which ones we thought were good. Just a massive spreadsheet of stuff with Twitter links and Parler links and video links. And then we kind of worked, and then they went in and sort of built, if you go to the site, there's metadata that links back to where is this from, all of that they put in. for each item. And so they did a lot of that work and got a lot out of it. I mean, they learned a lot. And we had a lot of really fruitful conversations about like, what does it look like to work on a project like this? Like, what does it look like to take this sort of images and videos that people shot that day and then put it on the internet and then make it into this kind of exhibit. So it really dovetailed nicely with stuff that was already happening in our department and stuff that I was already doing, and interests I already had too.
That's awesome. It's so fascinating to hear about the backstory about what comes into this and how the thought process that brings it up. I have this kind of two-part question, and I like asking questions that like are kind of impossible to answer, because I just think it gets like cool, like, answers coming out and cool ideas. And I don't think it's necessarily impossible, but let's imagine just for a second, like we're 250 years in the future. Excuse me, or 500 years in the future. We're looking back on January 6th, the day of the insurrection or riot, or the day that the good old Americans stood up finally for what they believed in, just depending on where you're coming from, I guess. You're looking back on this, and you guys are historians, so you know the historical process of finding data and trying to piece together what happened and all that stuff. How do you think that you would interpret this? Like, say you're looking back on it at a distance from the past, like what would that objectively look like to you? And then even after, like, what is your interpretation today about it? If you dare to venture that.
I mean, don't ask us anything hard.
Well, first, before Mike goes in, Peter Manceau, our colleague and one of his colleagues at the Smithsonian, published early in January an op-ed at the New York Times where they sort of imagine what it'd be like to rethink January 6th from the perspective of 30, 40, 50 years from now.
That's great.
And their argument, they're imagining going into, Statuary Hall and seeing a statue of the QAnon,
the shaman,
right? The QAnon shaman being celebrated as a great hero of this event. And the point they were making is that, it will be later generations that sort of decide what happened in a certain sense, right? That they will interpret this history, and therefore it's very important as we move forward to understand that curating history is a political activity, right? So I would recommend to you guys and to your listeners to take a look at that article, which kind of grapples with that question in rather, I think, disturbing or challenging way.
Yeah, it's hard. It's a hard question because we're in this weird moment now where I don't know what things look like 5 years from now, much less 250 or whatever. There's a book that I read in grad school by a guy, William McLaughlin, called Revival something Reforms. I can't think off the top of my head. It's a thin little book, and everyone in my grad school class that read it hated it, but I loved it because he basically divides. It was written in the 70s. He divides all of American history into 4 periods of revival and reform. And in his sign, there's this sort of circle of revival breaks out, and then it kind of calcifies into a social formation, and then people get tired of that and they break the whole thing up. And it was just one of these great big swings of I'm a historian, I'm going to read a lot of anthropology and sociology, and then take a big swing at something and do it in 185 pages. But I don't know that I liked it because I think he might be kind of right. Not specifically, but it feels like we're in this moment where everything feels in multiple ways wide open and up for grabs in ways that are terrifying, but also in ways that can be opportunities. And I don't know. So it's hard for me to know what that's going to look like, right? So in some ways, it's well, what happens in the next 10 years? How do the shakeups that we've experienced in the last 10 years begin to becomes more solid in certain ways, and what does that look like, right? And because I think what I'm beginning to learn is that if Make America Great Again was like we need to go back to the 50s and the stability of like post-war America, that's the exception when it comes to the way societies work, not the rule. Like you're only going to get there briefly, and then the 60s are going to happen, and then right. And so I think it feels like who's going to win this culture war when this is all over will determine whose statues get put in the and how this is read, right? And to the extent that this project now makes some of the visions of what was happening that day available, and then opens up people to ask questions about what happened and why it happened. I hope it'll help to add some clarity and some places, some firm foundations to actually hang something or build something going forward. But it's hard to answer that question because I feel like it's just the tumult is too real right now.
Yeah. It's speaking of culture, for those that are listening and not watching on YouTube, I have to make a brief comment that like Mike, you look just like Ben Folds 5. I don't know if you've ever been told that before.
Mike actually is Ben Folds.
I did not live in Carrboro. I did grow up in Durham for part of my teens, where Ben Folds was a kind of demigod for every skinny white boy my age. But so here's the thing: I used to wear a tie and dress shirt to teach it every day, and then COVID happened, and I got tenured.
Nice.
And so I just
tenure.
So I just decided, like, guy who may own this record store is the look.
You're like, I'm teaching in Lululemon. I don't care. You know,
that's awesome.
Like, this guy has children, so he should own something. But he's standing in this record store, so maybe it's his.
Maybe, I don't know. Did he write the records?
No, that's funny. But in all seriousness, I'm curious on, there's a lot of media, a lot of essays as part of this project. Was there one particular image, video, or essay that really kind of stood out to each of you? And you can go first, Ben.
Yeah, I think I know which.
Don't take.
I know which one Jerome's gonna say. I have a couple. Mostly, so like one of my jobs in the project, Jerome did a lot of the heavy lifting on the editing side and for the essays, and sort of my big task was sort of organizing and building out the site. Like the students kind of put everything into the site, and then it was my job to kind of like, how are we going to organize these essays? What are we going to embed with the essays? That kind of stuff. And so I kind of have like my favorite from each section, but I think one that stays with me is the guys climbing the wall video that Cody Musselman, a Yale PhD student, she wrote an essay about. Because at first glance, you're like, what is this? Why is this? What does that have to do with religion or anything? And it's these young men climbing up the wall into the Capitol building on one side. And what you can't quite tell, but she talks about is like right next to this wall is stairs, right? And so as these guys are climbing up this wall, it's like, why? Like, and she has this great title for the essay. You don't raid the Capitol by the stairs or something like that. And she talks about the way like masculinity and fitness culture has been infused with not just certain forms of Protestantism, but certain forms of kind of like metaphysical or New Age religion, and how behind these dudes climbing this wall is this whole world of kind of, the CrossFit, get ready for anything culture that has its roots and all the way back to the 19th century American physical culture, metaphysical movement. And so I love that image because it's like, there's just so much happening and you wouldn't think that there's a religion angle on it, but in fact it's like, it's the thing behind the thing that's going on there. So that would be one. The other one that I like is, in terms of the ones that are connected to the essays, Samad Chowdhury has a piece on Jenna Ryan. She became internet famous and then is now in prison for trespassing, but where she has a video of her yelling about how she's a great real estate agent and will sell your effing house, and then turns and says, "In the name of Jesus," and bolts to the doors of the Capitol in the crowd. This is all on her phone style. And then proceeded to release a number of TikTok videos after her conviction. And there's one even she posted like a night or two before she goes to jail where she talks about using it as a time to cleanse and do a lot of yoga. And Samad just traces her whole story and again talks about how it connects to notions of Christian womanhood, but also notions of kind of boss lady culture and the politics of female entrepreneurialism and how these inflect one another. And it's one of the few essays that kind of starts that day and kind of tells a whole story. So like both of those jump out to me. For just the video being I sent that to Simone. I was like, I was like, what do you think you want to write about? She's like, I don't really know. Just send me something. I sent her that. I was like, good luck. And she did like a great job with it. And so I was just, I was impressed.
What about you, Jerome?
Awesome.
I'm going to, before I give my example, I want to sort of use what Mike is saying to say something about the way we thought about and organized the project. Immediately after the event, many commentators started discussing it in terms of Christian nationalism or Christian Trumpism, right? That there was religion there, and really it was white evangelicals in support of Trump who were involved, and that's largely true. But what we saw very clearly was it wasn't only white evangelicals who were involved in both the rallies and the protests and the attack on the Capitol. There were people who were displaying their Catholicism. There were Mormons involved. There were Orthodox Jews involved. There were neo-pagans involved. So it was a religious event that was broader. I mean, most of the people came in support of Donald Trump and an attempt to stop the steal by disrupting this political ritual that was to occur. But it wasn't simply a Christian nationalist evangelical event. There were other things going on. So that was that second level. And that third level is what Mike was talking about, which is that we can use the tools, the vantage point of religious studies to see the religious dimensions of what do not on the face of it appear to be religious activities, right? Like the scaling of the wall, for example. So those were the three dimensions or the three lenses in which we tried to look at the materials that we gathered together. Now, as far as the objects that I think really characterize my approach to the project, I think Phil Gorsky's essay on the prayer in the Capitol Rotunda, and that we have a number of videos of people within the Capitol Rotunda, and I think that they're really interesting because of the way in which we see religion, and particularly a religion in relationship to American politics and American history, what we might call civil religion. This goes back to why we titled the project Uncivil Religion. So in this particular video, there are people parading through the Capitol Rotunda with American flags, with Trump flags. There may have been Confederate flags there as well, singing Battle Hymn of the Republic, which is interesting because the Battle Hymn of the Republic was a Union song. So people who may have had Confederate sympathies singing Battle Hymn of the Republic is awkward. It was a song. The lyrics were originally about John Brown's body. And John Brown himself was an abolitionist who was executed for trying to commit insurrection against the United States government at Harper's Ferry and to incite a slave revolt. So there are these weird tensions that are going on within that. And the video focuses on a particular participant who seems to be experiencing a kind of peak religious moment right? He's overcome by emotions. People come to talk to him to help him out, and they engage in a prayer huddle, like what you'd expect of a football team. The camera is then put on the ground so we can see the ceiling, and of course, the top of the Capitol Rotunda is a fresco of the apotheosis of George Washington. So George Washington ascending into heaven as a god, right? So it's such a rich video. There's so much going on. In a way, it is so complex and so confused that I think for me, it really sums up what I was trying to get at in thinking of and bringing together these materials and offering it to a larger public.
So it just sounds like there was a lot of diversity, like surprising amount of diversity, maybe I should say, and what almost seemed like a monolithic group, but there was a surprising amount of diversity within that group. And then even like these like confused and conflated narratives of what people believed and the different representations of religion in America. I guess my question is, what do you think this says about religion in America? I mean, you've hinted at it, but I wanted to kind of ask it in a direct way. What do you guys think this says to someone not in America about religion in America? What kind of window does this give us as we look at this?
I think this kind of goes off what Jerome was talking about, the kind of layers and layers of it. Because one thing that struck me as I went through all these images and videos is it's the number, like the symbols and the language. If you hear people talking, the prayers, the songs, it's I think one way that I've been looking at it is that religion is this. We want to use the fancy academic term, it's this sort of discursive toolbox, but it's this kind of cultural toolbox that certain Americans use to authorize their claims, right? And so for me, it's all like everything, not everything, but a lot of what happened on January 6th is the political claims about the election and Donald Trump and any number of things that are kind of in that those political claims get made through the rhetoric of, or the language of, or the ritual practice of, or the symbols of what we might think of as religion, right? And so to me, what it says is that any kind of distinction between religion and politics is false. Like should be kind of broken. It should be collapsed into each other. And on that day, how do you make a claim that the election was rigged be really true and authoritative? Well, you bathe it in worship music. You bathe it in prayer. You do it with a cross and a Christian flag. Like these symbols are not, and the things people say about taking back America or making America more Christian, or we have a Christian nation, all that you hear is this. These are authority claims, and that people are using this language and these images and these rituals to, and I don't to bolster and give these political claims a kind of transcendence and transcendent authority, right? This is something that religious studies scholar Bruce Lincoln writes about a lot, and I think for me, like that's the reading, and I don't mean that to say, like one reading of that is to say, oh, the religion is fake, it's all just politics. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that no, the politics is real, and the religion becomes this this tool, this method, this practice for authorizing that.
Yeah. The we lost you there for a second, Jerome. Glad to have you back. For for those listening, you wouldn't have noticed anything. But I'm curious, like from both you guys. I mean, I'd imagine you guys waded through, I don't know, gobs and gobs of terabytes of, I don't know, media and files and whatnot. Was there ever a part of you guys that were thinking or hoping in the back of your head that you wouldn't see somebody you recognized, or did you see somebody that you recognized?
Oh, Dad! Oh no!
I wasn't worried about that. Now that you mention it, it would have been interesting.
The congressman, not my congressman, my old congressman before I moved across town, him and his wife made breakfast that morning for everybody at the rally. They were giving up breakfast, so we're not friends.
Nice.
But
Wow.
That's hilarious. One thing I was thinking is do you guys think that there's another like figure in American history that, or even you could take it beyond American history? I guess a better question is what figure in history, modern history, like has had this kind of fervor, religious fervor, in terms of their followership in the wider public? Is there something you can think of? What do you think that parallel should teach us? Maybe warnings that the parallel might make for us.
When Trump first got on the scene, I thought that the sort of analogy would be to someone like Berlusconi in Italy, right? Sort of, someone who was a plutocrat coming in. But it became very clear that Trump's appeal has to do with his own odd charisma and his own ability to really reach his audience and reach his base in a way that, I don't think any other modern American politician has ever done. Now, he also was a masterful use of social media. He sort of cultivated an image using reality television. In fact, one could argue that he would not have had this sort of third act of his career as a politician if it were not for the show The Apprentice.
Sure, yeah.
Right. I think it's interesting to think about where The Apprentice came from and who produced The Apprentice. And I think what the other thing that's very interesting about Trump is his ability to use that charisma to take over the Republican Party. Right. Now Trump says that people who oppose him are rhinos, right? Republicans in name only. Trump was a Republican in name only when he became a member of the Republican Party, right? In fact, Trump is the selling points of Trumpism to his base are, in fact, many of which go against Republican orthodoxy, right? So what he was able to do was essentially take over the party and rebrand the party in his own image, right? Which is remarkable.
That is remarkable.
And so I think the danger. It showed that the guardrails of what we consider to be the guardrails of the American political process were not as high or as strong as we thought they would be, but also the guardrails within the party establishment itself were not as strong. Like there always talks, we'll control him, right, or he'll grow into the presidency, right? There'll be adults in the room, right? You can remember saying all these things. And what Trump has shown is that with his own will, with his own charisma, and with the support of people who are willing to go along for whatever reason, all of those things really fell aside, right? All of those, informal political mores and checks and balances that, we thought were there that we can depend upon. And I think that's that's new in American history. We could draw analogies to other countries. Some of them are, maybe easy to grasp. But I think the danger's still there. And I think, other politicians are going to look very carefully at Trump and his failures and his successes, and try to create their own political images following his model.
What do you think, Mike?
I think one way to understand Trump, at least the charisma of Trump, is to remember that Donald Trump is the only U.S. president inducted in the WWE Hall of Fame. And so, as much as reality TV is
I didn't know that. That's awesome.
And the only president to ever appear at a WrestleMania. I think, and I actually do think, not that Trump learned from professional wrestling, but I think that there is more better explanations for Trump's ability to his charismatic ability in professional wrestling, or someone like P.T. Barnum in the 19th century, than we sometimes think about, or even televangelists, who I think are similar in that ability, that the goal is to get the emotional reaction from the crowd. Like, that's the goal, right? And it's a certain kind of demagoguery that relies on the suspension of belief. So there's some really interesting work thinking about how a lot of people know that stuff Trump says is wrong or untrue, and they choose to believe it anyway. Just like thousands of people will pack in to an arena and know those two dudes aren't really fighting, but anyways, right? For the thrill, they want to suspend their disbelief and be a part of it. And I think that a lot of Trump's charisma is his ability to know, and a lot of the pivoting that happens that he does and the shifting is a constant back and forth with the audience, right? Where he can gauge what they want and know when to take it up, when to cool it down, when to take it back up again, right? And that that ability, I think, and the ability to get people to buy into stuff that they know is not true. This to me is the explanation for the and this is something I'm working on writing up. This is the explanation for the 81% white evangelical question. Why do 81% of white evangelicals who don't want same-sex marriage, don't like divorce, will all these things, who can see all the moral failings of Trump, why do they choose this man? And there's the exchange argument about judges and all this, but that doesn't explain the fervency. That doesn't explain the emotion and the passion, right? And so there's I think a willing suspension of belief to give oneself over and kind of get worked up, that is pleasurable, and that becomes a cycle of identity formation, and you become a fan, and you become invested in this person, and you become invested in their success. So I think that's a huge part of it. When it
and yet, I was just going to follow up that, the thing about Trump is he wasn't just the impresario, right? Yeah. He was also the wrestler, right? So think about all those like cartoons or videos that you saw of Trump as a kind of as a wrestler or as a Rambo, right? That Trump embodied himself. This pugilistic, this very aggressive attitude, and he was a champion of people who felt that their culture was being marginalized by the libs, right? So owning the libs, right? Whether it was done on Twitter or whether it was done, in a press conference, whatever. Yeah. Those very things that tone, that aggressiveness was seen as a sign of his, making America great again, right? Even if nothing came of it from a policy point of view, he was willing to go to the mattresses. Right?
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm surprised, Mike, that that it took you this long to interject wrestling, because I couldn't help but notice, like, just reading your profile, that you seem to be a fan. So, and Wordle too, whatever that is. I'm resisting the urge to jump on the Wordle train.
Been bought out by the New York Times, and so now it's just icky. I don't know.
So it's over. Wordle's over.
Now it's the failing Wordle.
Yeah. No more Wordle and no more David Leonhardt. That's where we are now.
but on your wrestling analogy about Trump, I'm curious. If, like you said, people suspend their belief, and I'm curious on how much of that is true, because the persona of Trump brought a lot of people to the polls for the first time. Ostensibly, you could say the same thing about Obama. The first time I ever voted was was for Obama, and he sort of got me, he sort of started the process of me wanting to be involved in the political process. And if you've got somebody that kind of hears about Trump, kind of gets their information through word of mouth and says, yeah, this guy seems like he's pretty legit. They don't follow him on Twitter. They go into it and then they start following, this person. If that's their first like foray into politics, they may not know that there's a different form that existed, so it's almost like I think to myself, thinking of wrestling, and like the moment that I realized that wrestling was fake, I grew up WWF, the Ultimate Warrior was my favorite, and I remember like my parents telling me at forgot what age, it might have been 21 or something, but like them telling me that, hey, wrestling's fake, and I'm like, no, it's not. And they're like, how? They're like, yes, it is. And I'm like, how can it be fake? You see how high that guy flew off the top turnbuckle? There's no way this could be fake.
Exactly.
And I'm thinking like in the same political sphere, like if you told an ardent Trump supporter that voted for the first time for Trump that this isn't normal, like they wouldn't know any different. Like, well, what do you think about that?
I think that so to be more specific, some people are suspending their disbelief, but I think the other side of it is what Trump really is. Like the fact that whatever Trump really is behind what he does doesn't really matter. And if you do find out it's fake, wrestling was at its most popular in American society in the late 90s when everyone knew it was fake, right? And so it almost at that point doesn't matter, or you're too invested. Like, and so I think that's a huge part of it. I think there are people. I think a big part of Trump, the way he works things is as this cipher that allows people to never there's all sorts of debate about this, like is Trump a genius or a moron or somewhere in between, like which one, but it's kind of like it doesn't matter because whatever, it's so surface, right, and that's what gets the response, and that's what attracts people, that to get them to buy in, right? I mean, it's another way to look at the same thing would be his sort of ability as a salesman to literally oftentimes sell nothing to people. His greatest, the only thing he ever made was his own name, like really. So I think there's a lot tied up with the kind of surfaceness of it and how people react to that as well. I don't know if that answered your question at all.
Hold on. It did. Yeah. Thank you. Appreciate that.
That's really good. So I have a question, kind of, and it is for, I'd love to hear both your responses on it. Let me just give some quick context. So I voted for Trump in 2016. I did not in 2020. And a lot of that had to do with, as I was thinking about it more, I was seeing I just didn't feel like our country was in a better place in 2020 leading up to the election. And even in 2019, I just didn't feel like it was in a better place than it was when he came into office. And a lot of my questions with Will, like a lot of my conversation with Will was very influential with me, just kind of thinking like, I remember in one particular conversation, Will was like, I just don't think he's a good for our country. And that really stuck with me. And I thought about that quite a bit. But when I came into 2016, I didn't feel deceived. I couldn't believe he was the guy I was voting for. I was in disbelief that it was actually the candidate that was there. I couldn't have imagined that was going to be the case. And I never got onto this like, oh, Trump's amazing or Trump's awesome. I just thought he's just the guy. He's the lesser of two evils. And maybe that wasn't the right thing to think at that time, but I just went with the information I had and voted with my conscience and my values as I did in 2020. So I guess the question I come to is like, what do you make of the fact? We've been talking about disbelief, but we're talking about like 70 million people, right? What do you make of the fact that many people came out and voted for him? If he is this like this grand, like, I don't know. And I'm not saying you're saying this, but like, it's almost like he's this grand, not deceiver, although maybe some people would say that. I'm sure they would, but almost like this caricature, this act, like it's not real. We've been having this whole thing. So what does that say about our country and us? 70 million people voted for him, you know, in this last election, more than any other president in history except Biden. It's crazy. So I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
I mean, my first, my first response is that Republicans voted for the Republican candidate, and that at the end of the day, either they voted for the Republican candidate on on economic issues, although that could break, given Trump, that could break in different ways,
sure,
right?
Yeah.
Or they voted for Trump on social issues, or they voted for Trump because he's the Republican candidate, and we vote for the Republican because we want to, better the Republican than the Democrat. And then there were people who voted for Trump because they were hardcore Trump supporters, and all those things added up to those 70 million votes. I think what is interesting to me is that Republican, when Trump picked Mike Pence, he picked Mike Pence to signal something to a particular constituency within the Republican Party.
Totally.
Right? He picked Mike Pence and what's fascinating to me is that, there was a moment where Trump was impeached and Trump could have been removed from office and Mike Pence would have been president. It wouldn't have been Nancy Pelosi. It wouldn't have been Hillary Clinton. It would have been Mike Pence. Perhaps I'm speculating here, but I suspect that some of the strongest defenders of Trump during the impeachment, both impeachments, were people in that community who Trump thought he was getting with Mike Pence. In other words, more of those people ended up supporting Trump as Trump rather than Trump because of Pence. And if Trump and Pence went on a head-to-head today within that community, I suspect that Trump would soundly defeat Pence. Right? So, there's something about Trump himself that was able to mobilize a lot of people. And a lot of those people might not have been typical, traditional Republican voters. But most of the people who voted for Trump at the end of the day were Republicans because they wanted a Republican president and a Republican administration and Republican priorities, rather than, the Democrats. So I think at the end of the day, that was sort of the bargain, that was the deal that was struck. So that's how, again, we can start looking at the polling data and try to tease out in finer detail, but
sure.
I think that would be my sort of observation.
Yeah,
from
partisanship is a hell of a drug. I mean, I think, I compare it to what it took to get Republican voters in Alabama to not vote Republican. It took Roy Moore. It took like that was the line for people to get off the train, like suburban white voters in Birmingham either just didn't come out or quietly voted for Doug Jones and didn't tell anybody. And all it took to get them back on the train was Tommy Tuberville. And so somewhere in between Roy Moore and Tommy Tuberville is the line that, at least for Alabama Republicans, right? And I think that's really instructive, right? That and it's kind of the inverse of Trump, that Trump was able to attract, these people who were not normally Republican and do it in such a way that he didn't lose people, right? He's on the Tommy Tuberville side of that line, right? And so, so I think I think that partisanship is just a huge, huge part of it.
Yeah. Is there a part of the work that you guys did with the Uncivil Religion that you think could be viewed what's the word I'm looking for? Like in a favorable light. And I mean, and I say that somewhat reluctantly because I think objectively what happened on January 6th was bad for the country. But, you know, the people that went there and actually did the deed and got arrested, you know, arguably there's a piece of them that probably still feels what they did was altruistic and right. So like, is there a side of this religious involvement on that day that can be viewed, you know, in a positive way, and not necessarily like your view, but you know, another person's view for kind of from the eyes of the people that actually stormed the Capitol?
I think one thing that we both tried to do, Jerome can say more about this, I think, too, but is we tried in the project to avoid the good religion, bad religion thing. Like, this is a very easy narrative that even scholars of religion fall into, like, you know, where it's like Jonestown, bad religion, MLK, good religion. And like, we kind of sort things out, especially politically that way. And I think we tried, one of the benefits of having, you know, there's way more objects in the project that are just standalone without any essay, and a lot of them, like there's a section, they're kind of all organized in different galleries. There's a people gallery where it's literally either just videos of people, or a lot of times it's people talking to their phones, like selfie videos, and you just get to hear what they're thinking and saying and what their take on the moment is. And I think that's a place where it's not positive, because I don't think we're doing either positive or negative labeling, but it's a place where people can at least see, the people who were supportive of this might see themselves represented, and we don't really comment on it. It's just kind of there. But I think we try to avoid a good religion, bad religion take on it.
What do you think, Jerome?
Well, you know, I'm thinking about the Capitol building, the language that was used about the assault on the Capitol. And so there were a number of representatives, congresspeople, senators who, in discussing the event, talked about that this was a desecration, using the language, using religious language to describe what the rioters were doing. The people who were involved in the attack on the Capitol, some of them discussed sort of taking over, sort of protecting the sacred space, right? So there's you know, the video that I talked about earlier of the QAnon shaman's prayer, right? That there was an understanding of on some of them, not all of them, that in fact this was a sacred space, and they were involved in a sacred process of doing this. I think, you know, the takeaway from point of view of religious studies is to illuminate how deeply connected our political language and symbols and activities are with those that are attached to religion itself. That even though we are a country that formally has a separation of government and religion, that in reality, in the minds and actions of everyday citizens, the language and the acts of religion can't so easily be teased out from political convictions and political actions. And I think one of the things that this project does is it kind of illuminates that this is the case, and not only not only among the insurrectionists and the people who were attending these rallies, but even among elected officials who understood themselves as occupying a sacred space and doing something that was sort of raised above the profane give and take horse trading of everyday politics. So I think, you know, it's important that we're able to see that is actually the case and have conversations about what that means and what we can do about it.
Wow, that's awesome. Last question, just a quick one. How do you want this project to be remembered? Do you want it, you know, to be remembered as just another chapter in American history? Do you want it to be remembered as like a piece of art? Or do you want it to be, remembered differently? I'm curious to kind of get both of your thoughts on that. You can go first, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, the project itself, I hope it's remembered as a resource for people and as a conversation starter. Like, I think the whole thing still raises more questions than it answers. But I think that's good, and I think, I hope it'll be a resource for teachers, whether it's not just at like the college level, but Sunday school teachers, community groups that want to dig into this stuff. And I hope that it's a conversation starter. I mean, I think about, like, I sent it to my dad, who is a former evangelical pastor and voted for Trump twice, and his very visceral reaction to it of, like, in a very midst, like, what is going on with these Christians? Like, this isn't what we're supposed to be doing. Like, very distraught. He was a very reluctant Trump voter. He was more of an anti-Biden voter than anything. And I think those conversations, like that, having those conversations and are not just at the personal level, but at the larger classroom level, whatever, are important. So I hope that's what it will be.
Awesome. What about you, Jerome?
Yeah, and I guess I'd go back to what, the question that Josh raised earlier in our conversation about, like, how this event will be remembered or memorialized in, 50 or 100 years from now. And I think what we wanted to do was to make sure that these images were curated and illuminated for what they are. Right? This was not just sort of a very marginal part of the event, but it was up and center, and it was part of the religious dimension, the religious motivation, the way in which people sort of brought together their various faith commitments and their commitments to Donald Trump and their commitment to a particular to participate in a particular political action in support of him, were bound up together, and I think what this resource can do is it forces us to recognize that fact and think about what it means and go forward and thinking about how we have a functioning democracy with people who have extremely different views on basic ideas and basic value issues, and sort of still be able to live together in a civil society, in a political community.
Yeah, that's well said. And
Yes.
Dr. Michael Altman and Dr. Jerome Copulsky of the Uncivil Religion Project, thank you both. This was truly
Thank you so much.
an awesome conversation. And
Great conversation.
And we really appreciate the work you guys are doing. And just for our guests, what's the website that people can find all that information?
Uncivilreligion.org.
All right, easy enough. Well, thanks again, everybody. And we will see you all next week. Thanks so much.